Picture this. You're in a McDonald's drive-thru, anywhere in America, Texas, Ohio, Florida, doesn't matter. You grab your fries, hot, salty, golden, the most American food experience on the planet. Except those fries aren't American. Those potatoes grew in Canadian soil, crossed an invisible line, got processed, frozen, shipped, and dropped into a fryer by a teenager making $11 an hour. And as of yesterday, those potatoes are now a weapon. Donald Trump just demanded that Canada hand over agricultural control as part of a new trade arrangement. He wanted Canada's potato supply chain to bend the knee. Mark Carney said no. But he didn't just say no. He locked the supply. And the American fast food industry, a $380 billion machine, just realized their entire French fry operation depends on a country that is done being pushed around. 48 hours ago, the Trump administration sent formal communication to Ottawa outlining new conditions for continued agricultural trade. The language was dense, bureaucratic, but the demand was simple. Canada would accept American pricing controls on key exports, including potatoes, or face exclusion from preferred trade status. In plain English, sell us your potatoes for what we decide they're worth, or we'll find them somewhere else. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an ultimatum dressed in trade policy. And here's what made it arrogant. The United States does not have somewhere else. American potato production hit a wall years ago. Climate shifts in Idaho and Washington, the two biggest domestic producers, have crushed yields 3 seasons running. Drought, heat waves, soil degradation. The farms aren't dying. They're just not keeping up. Meanwhile, Canadian potato production expanding. Prince Edward Island alone exports over $500 million in potatoes annually. New Brunswick, Manitoba, Alberta, all ramping up. The infrastructure exists. The cold chain exists. The processing plants exist. And every single major fast food chain in America knows it. McDonald's knows it. Burger King knows it. Wendy's knows it. Five Guys knows it. So when the Trump administration sent that demand, they weren't negotiating from strength. They were negotiating from hunger. And they didn't seem to realize it. But someone in Ottawa did. Let me show you something that most Americans, and apparently most American trade negotiators, have never looked at. The United States imports approximately 1.2 billion pounds of frozen potato products every year. 70% of that comes from one country, Canada. Not Peru, not the Netherlands, not Poland. Canada. That's 840 million pounds of frozen potato product flowing south across the border annually. French fries, hash browns, tater tots, potato wedges, the building blocks of American fast food. And it's not just volume, it's timing. American potato harvests peak in September and October, but fast food demand is constant, year-round, which means from November through August, the American fast food industry is running on stored supply and imported supply. Guess where the imports come from? The dependency goes deeper than most people understand. See, it's not just about raw potatoes, it's about processed potatoes. The freezing, the cutting, the par frying, the coating. Canada has built an entire processing infrastructure specifically optimized for the American market. McCain Foods, headquartered in New Brunswick, is the largest frozen potato producer on the planet. Their facilities run 24/7, year-round, with American fast food specs programmed into every production line. You can't just switch suppliers overnight. You can't just find another country that cuts fries to McDonald's exact specifications, freezes them to McDonald's exact temperature requirements, and ships them in McDonald's exact packaging formats. That infrastructure took decades to build, and Mark Carney knows that better than anyone. 70%, and most Americans have no idea, including apparently the people who made this demand. If you're realizing you need to understand supply chains before they empty the shelves you use, subscribe. Because this is just the first product. I'm tracking all of them. Mark Carney is not a politician by training. He's a central banker, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, the man who steered 2 countries through financial crises. He thinks in systems, levers, pressure points. So when the Trump demand landed on his desk, He didn't respond emotionally. He didn't fire off an angry press release. He didn't call a press conference to complain about American bullying. He did something worse. He responded with precision. Within 36 hours of the American demand, Carney's government announced a review of agricultural export priorities. The language was technical, almost boring, but the message was a blade. The review would assess whether current export volumes align with Canadian domestic needs and strategic international partnerships. Translation: we might need these potatoes ourselves, or we might send them to someone else. And that's when the fast food industry's phones started ringing. See, Carney didn't threaten to cut off potato exports. That would be too obvious, too aggressive. It would let Trump plain Canada was starting a trade war. Instead, Carney implied uncertainty. And uncertainty in supply chain logistics is worse than a cutoff. A cutoff you can plan for, you can scramble, you can find alternatives. Uncertainty freezes everyone. If McDonald's doesn't know whether Canadian potatoes will flow next month, they can't sign contracts, they can't lock in prices, they can't guarantee franchises that the fries will be there. The whole system, the gears that turn a potato into a profit, starts grinding against itself. But Carney wasn't done. The same announcement mentioned exploring expanded partnerships with European and Asian markets for Canadian agricultural exports. Now, Europe doesn't need Canadian potatoes, not really. Neither does Asia. But that's not the point. The point is to show Washington that Canada has options. The point is to remind the United States that they're not the only customer at the table. And here's the part that made this brilliant. Carney released this review at 4 p.m. Eastern on a Friday, right before markets closed, which means American food industry executives spent the entire weekend staring at their phones, wondering if their Monday supply chains still existed. That's not just a response. That's psychological warfare with a spreadsheet. The American Frozen Food Institute, the industry lobbying group, put out a statement within hours. It didn't criticize Canada. It criticized the demand. They called the Trump administration's approach counterproductive and unnecessarily destabilizing to establish supply relationships. When your own industry lobbies against your trade policy in public, the ecosystem has already turned. All right, I need to know. Drop it in the comments right now. Is Carney a genius, or is he about to start a fry war that hurts Canadian farmers too? Because there's an argument both ways. I'm reading every single take. As I'm recording this, there are meetings happening in conference rooms you'll never see. McDonald's corporate headquarters in Chicago, Wendy's in Dublin, Ohio, Restaurant Brands International, that's Burger King and Tim Hortons in Toronto. They're all running the same calculations. What happens if Canadian potato supply drops by 20%? What happens if it drops by 50%? What happens if it stops entirely? These aren't hypothetical exercises anymore. An industry source told me this morning that at least 2 major chains have already contacted alternative suppliers in Europe. They're getting quotes, running logistics models, trying to figure out if Dutch or Belgian potatoes could fill the gap. The answer so far is not quickly. European producers don't have excess capacity sitting around. Their facilities are already committed to their own markets. Spinning up new production lines takes months. Redirecting shipping containers takes weeks at minimum. And even if they could do it, the cost would be catastrophic. Canadian potatoes cross into the United States by truck. Short distances, low fuel costs, established routes. European potatoes would come by ship, across the Atlantic, refrigerated containers, port delays, customs inspections, fuel costs that have tripled since 2020. One fast food analyst estimated that replacing Canadian potato supply with European alternatives would add 40 cents to every order of large fries. That doesn't sound like much, but McDonald's sells approximately 9 million pounds of fries per day in the United States alone. 40 cents times millions of orders times 365 days, you're looking at billions of dollars in additional costs. Someone has to eat those costs. Either the company margins shrink, which shareholders hate, or the prices go up, which customers hate. There's no good option. And right now, in those conference rooms, executives are realizing something that the White House apparently didn't consider. The cheap American fast food meal, the $5 value menu, the $6 combo, the $7 family deal. Those prices were built on a foundation of Canadian potatoes. Disrupt that foundation, the whole pricing model collapses. Here's what's already happening. Sysco and U.S. Foods, the two largest food distributors in America, have both issued supply advisories to their restaurant clients in the last 24 hours. The advisories don't say there's a shortage, not yet. They say there's potential volatility in frozen potato product availability and recommend securing additional inventory buffers where possible. In normal language, buy extra now before it gets worse. That's not a warning. That's the first sound of a stampede. I need to pull back for a second, because if you think this is just about French fries, you're missing the real story. Potatoes are a symbol. They're the most visible product, the one that hits Americans where they live, in their daily lunch, their road trip snacks, their kids' Happy Meals. But the dependency web, it stretches everywhere. Canada supplies 30% of America's softwood lumber, the stuff that builds houses. Right now, with the housing market already strangled by prices, any disruption to lumber supply would send construction costs through the roof. Canada supplies over 20% of America's crude oil imports. Not just any oil, the specific grades that American refineries are configured to process. Switching to other sources isn't just expensive. For some refineries, it's physically impossible without major equipment changes. Canada supplies 100% of America's imported electricity in certain northern states, Minnesota, Michigan, parts of New York. You can't store electricity. When it stops flowing, the lights go out. And here's the one that should make Washington genuinely nervous: uranium. Canada is America's largest foreign supplier of uranium, the fuel that powers nuclear reactors. And nuclear reactors generate roughly 20% of America's electricity. You can't run a nuclear plant on anger. You can't power a hospital with tweets. What Carney understands, what every Canadian trade official has understood for years, is that the relationship isn't balanced. America is the bigger economy, no question. But Canada is integrated into American infrastructure in ways that can't be easily replaced. The supply chains aren't just commercial relationships, they're dependencies. And dependencies can be leveraged. Every time the Trump administration sends another demand, another threat, another tariff, they're not just negotiating with Canada, they're negotiating with their own economy's life support systems. The potato demand wasn't really about potatoes, it was a test. Trump's team wanted to see if Canada would buckle under pressure, if Carney would cave the way they expected him to. He didn't. He showed them exactly how many strings he can pull. The White House responds in approximately 14 hours. They have to. The market opens Monday and every fast food stock is already twitching. I'm posting the moment they speak. Turn on notifications. So where does this go? Right now, 3 scenarios are on the table. Scenario 1, the walkback. The Trump administration quietly abandons the potato demand. No formal announcement, no admission of overreach, just silence. The review in Ottawa gets shelved. Supply chains return to normal. Everyone pretends this never happened. This is the face-saving option. But here's the problem. Trump doesn't do face-saving. His entire brand is built on never backing down, never admitting error. A quiet retreat looks like weakness, and Carney knows this. Scenario 2, the escalation. Trump doubles down. He claims Canada is engaging in economic warfare against the United States. He threatens tariffs not just on potatoes, but on automobiles, steel, aluminum, anything that moves across the border. This turns a potato dispute into a full trade war. The economic damage would be catastrophic for both sides, but proportionally worse for Canada. They're the smaller economy. They'd feel it harder. Except Carney has already shown he's willing to use Canada's leverage. And America's fast food industry, lumber industry, energy sector, they'd all be screaming at Washington to stop. Scenario 3, the deal. Someone, maybe not Trump, maybe a deputy, maybe a back-channel negotiator, reaches out to Ottawa. A real negotiation happens. Carney gets something he wants. Trump gets something he can spin as a win. The potato demand disappears into diplomatic history. This is the rational outcome. But we're not living in rational times. What I'm watching in the next 24 hours. First, Trump's social media. He's been quiet about this so far, unusually quiet. That either means he's preparing a massive counterattack or his advisors are desperately trying to talk him down. Second, fast food stock prices when markets open Monday. If McDonald's, Wendy's, or Yum brands show unusual movement in pre-market trading, it means institutional investors are already pricing in supply chain damage. Third, any statement from the Canadian Potato Council or Canadian agricultural trade groups. If they start talking publicly, it means Carney has given them permission to apply pressure. The next move happens soon, and whoever blinks first sets the tone for every trade negotiation that follows. There's a principle in ecology called trophic dependency. It describes what happens when a predator becomes so reliant on a single prey species that the relationship inverts. The predator can't survive without that prey, and suddenly the prey has power it never had before. The deer doesn't need the wolf, but the wolf needs the deer. For decades, America has treated Canada like a deer, a resource to be harvested, a neighbor to be pushed around, a supplier who would always be there, always grateful for the business, always willing to accept whatever terms were offered. That assumption was comfortable. It was also wrong. What Mark Carney just demonstrated with a single bureaucratic announcement on a Friday afternoon is that the relationship has changed. The wolf is hungry, and the deer controls the food supply. Those fries you eat at McDonald's? Canadian. The house being built down the street? Canadian lumber. The electricity keeping your hospital running? Might be Canadian. The fuel in the reactor powering your city? Probably Canadian. Trump demanded tribute. Carney demanded respect. And the American fast food industry just learned something their government apparently forgot. When you depend on someone for the basics, the things people eat, the things people live in, the power that keeps everything running, you don't issue ultimatums. You negotiate. Tomorrow, the White House has to respond. The question isn't what they'll say, it's what they'll actually do. Because Mark Carney is watching. Ottawa is watching. And every country that's ever been on the receiving end of an American demand is watching to see if Canada just rewrote the playbook. The potatoes are the beginning. What comes next depends on whether anyone in Washington understands what just happened. That feeling right now, that, oh, they messed with the wrong country feeling, that's what I find every single day. Trade wars, power plays, empires making the stakes. Tomorrow, I'm dropping the video on what Carney does if Trump doubles down, and I have sources saying Trump will double down. Subscribe. Be here.